This channel is supported by Truefire. Truefire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. Right, I'm someone who gets to sort of look at quite a lot of guitars sort of up close, maybe more than the average bear. And in this video I want to talk to you about the number one sign of a cheap guitar. If you want to leave yours in the comments whilst I do some playing on a very budget Squier guitar, then feel free to do so. Also, just while you're here, I wanted to shout out Truefire. If you wanted to get any Truefire course, you can use the code JNC40 to get 40% off, or JNC100 to get $100 off their all access pass. A few courses on there that I really like. Tim Miller's creative arpeggio design, I think that's a really good one. Tim Lurch has got some amazing stuff if you're wanting to get into chord melody and some more sort of jazzy side of stuff. Yeah, loads of great stuff on there. Anyway, JNC40, 40% off any individual course, or JNC100 to get $100 off of their yearly all access membership. So, what is the sign of a cheap guitar for you? For me, it generally doesn't tend to be about looks particularly anymore. I think quite a lot of the cheaper guitars are looking quite good. It doesn't seem to me to be necessarily about the cuts of wood used. For instance, here, this is a Squier Debut. This is a piece of bird's eye maple. Like the maple has bird's eyes on it. Which would be a premium thing when I was sort of looking at Music Man guitars back in the day. You know, bird's eye maple was one of their selling points. I guess one thing is the cheap looking plastics. That's something that really does sort of ramp up. If you look through like the Squiers and go all the way up to sort of Fender Custom Shop, the plastics I think change quite considerably. But even as you go into like Player 2 territory, the plastics start actually looking quite a lot nicer. The real number one for me, and also Tom Bukovac, I saw in Rob Baker's video with the fake Gibson thing, that he was pointing out the nut on a thing. Now, I was already going to make this video because I had a little folder on my phone where I was kind of going through deleting some stuff where I kind of looked at like nuts on a few guitars. So see if you can spot which ones you think are the cheap guitars from these and leave your comments below. But yeah, basically, let me just get my camera. What you often find is that the nut is quite high, quite chunky and quite plasticky. Now there are a few things like these squarer edges where they've removed less material. That'll be an aspect of it, but also the general height. Now they might have cut the slots lower so that you don't at least have like bad intonation here, but a lot of the time they might leave like excess material on the nut. That's the real thing that you see, and I don't know why it is that on Japanese made guitars in particular they seem to have, in my experience, solved this. Looking here, American made Silver Sky, much tidier than the Squier. here we've got a fairly budget Gear for Music Heartwood. Now this guitar in general impressed me quite a lot. This is the only area of the guitar that gives it away, really. It's not always the case. So here's like an Ibanez AZ, and there is a certain price where I think they start to solve these things in general, but this is more of a sort of tusk style nut. Quite a lot tidier looking work there. A Fender Standard, I think that's tidy-ish looking too. I think that's the dead giveaway. Generally, things like frets these days, I typically find, even on things like, you know, at the lower ends, tend to be pretty good. That, I think, remains the giveaway. I don't know why it is the case that maybe this is one of the more skilled areas of actually putting a guitar together. You know, you bolt on a neck, that's fairly straightforward. You screw in these bits and pieces together. I guess most of the things like body holes and stuff like that would be drilled, like automatically, you'd assume. Or there might be a jig involved, so there's not too much room for error. Then the neck pocket and the neck are going to be, you know, CNC. You need to make sure they're aligned properly before you stick screws in, but that's fairly safe. The machine heads, I guess you've got to make sure those are aligned. As I've made a few guitars, these are things that I've kind of realised. The fret job, like, and fret ends, that's one area as well. So one thing that I would say, like, on a really, at the cheaper end, you typically might find that the fretboards aren't super well polished, and so you get a bit of a rough feeling when you pick the guitar up out of the box. That's typically something I tend to see on guitars that are sort of under the £500 price range. This Fender Standard actually is remarkably smooth feeling fret job. Things like PRS, they seem to do a really good job of these, but the Eastern made guitars, that is one other area, particularly like that Ibanez AZ Standard, which has stainless steel frets. You don't really get the benefit because they've not been very well polished, and you then get like a bit of a rough feel to the fretboard. I think that is one other area that may be even slightly more irritating than a slightly dodgy nut job. But yeah, that I think is, for me, one area which I still feel like you can tell the difference between something that's been made either in America, Japan, or, you know, one of the more established countries versus these slightly cheaper guitars. And I don't know exactly why that is, but that is definitely one area. You can put on locking tuners, you can put on, you know, good hardware, Goto stuff, but if the nut is looking kind of high and kind of blocky, you might have yourself a cheaper guitar. Let me know your thoughts. Is that something that you've noticed on guitars? Is that something you look out for? Is there a remedy for this? Can you just get a new nut put in? I presume that would be definitely possible. I've had nuts put on guitars before. Those would be my key giveaways. The nut is one that really does give it away. Rough fret jobs, not these days. Like, I don't tend to feel too much fret sprout or rough edges on fretboards anymore. I think they've started to figure that out, even on the cheaper end of stuff. Like, these manufacturers are generally doing a pretty good job of that, but not super well polished. And then things like cheap looking plastic, which ultimately I don't think necessarily affect the playing experience too much. The nut definitely can, and the rougher feeling frets definitely can. Well, this feels pretty smooth from that regard as well. So yeah, and I think also you get like these slightly odd looking bits of hardware on some of the cheaper guitars, which look less sleek and kind of look a bit more blocky. Those are things that I'd be looking out for signs of a cheaper guitar. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.